Good evening. My name is Dan Rowe, and I'm the mayor of Roseville. And I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you all here this evening and thank you for coming. We've got a tremendous crowd. I'm so excited to see so many people here. Certainly it hopefully means for a great set of conversations that we'll be having this evening. I did want to just take a moment to talk a little bit about how we got where we are this evening and not get into a whole lot of detail. We've got more information that'll maybe help with that. But basically, you notice the name of this is Imagine Roseville. And for some of you, it may be familiar to that expression from our visioning process that we had as a community in 2005. We had a group of several dozen people that were in a number of committees based on infrastructure and public safety and environment and economic development and a number of topics, and came up with a blueprint, if you will, a vision for our community. It was called Imagine Roseville 2025. It's actually hard to believe that it's been 11 years now ago that we did that. And we've been using that as sort of a framework by which to make decisions in our community. And a couple of the aspirations that came out of that have been sort of paraphrased a little bit by the council a few years ago and have some meaning this evening. And those are that Roseville aspires to be a welcoming community, and we also aspire to be safe and law-abiding. And those two things, I think, are very directly related to what we'll be talking about this evening. There's a number of other aspirations as well, and that information is available from the city and at the city's website, along with our mission statement that ties to that. But that was called Imagine Roseville 2025. This late summer, as we were going through responding, sort of reacting to some of the things that were in the news this year, a group of folks got together and started thinking about doing something like this. And that group was a handful of people to start with. It grew to a much larger group, say around 15, 20 people that represented the school district, the city, members of the community, faith community, a number of others. As the plans came forward, then one of the parts of the process was figuring out what to call this or what the tagline was. And we were talking about where do we see ourselves years from now as a community. And that kind of keyed my memory of Imagine Roseville. And so we thought, well, maybe Imagine Roseville is the appropriate thing to call this. And once again, this is the first of hopefully a number of discussions that we have around a variety of issues related to our future together. And I do want to apologize for the sound here. Hopefully it's not so much because I'm moving around, but because we're just trying to tweak the PA system. But anyway, we came together, we made these plans. I think we had a lot of good back and forth and discussion about how to get to where we are this evening. I think we've got a really exciting set of things happening this evening that you'll be able to participate very actively in if that's what you'd like to do, or more passively if that's what you'd like to do. And we'll get into that a little more later, but wanted to just once again thank you all for being here and welcome you and introduce our facilitator for this evening, Marquita Stevens, who most recently was with the Roseville Schools, and she'll fill you in on more of her background, but I'll turn it over to Marquita now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Can you hear me? Good. Well, good evening, everyone. So glad to see so many people here. It's exciting to see so many faces that I remember from my days at the school district, and to reconnect with you and to meet some new friends, to see some new folks to connect with. And that's one of the goals for tonight, is to connect with people. We want you to make sure that you connect with somebody that you didn't know upon arriving. So during the discussion period, please be sure to sit somewhere where there are people that you don't know. Particularly if you came from the same household, we want you to make sure that you sit at separate tables, and then you'll have all the more things to talk about when you get back in the car, Tonight we're going to start off with a panel. We have several people here that I'll introduce. They will talk to you for 2-3 minutes from the varying perspectives about events that have recently occurred and things that are on their mind. And it's a launch pad for the discussions at the table tonight. On your tables is a green sheet with 3 questions on them that we'd like you to discuss. No particular order, but we'd like to make sure that you have identified somebody at the table to take notes There has to be a scribe at the table and someone that's going to report out. Now, not everybody is going to, every table will have an opportunity to report out, but we want to hear from as many as time will permit. So we need a scribe and a reporter at each table. After the panel and the hearing from the chief of police, you'll enter into conversation at your table around those 3 questions. There will be a question and answer session at the end where the panelists will come back to the front and answer your questions, the panelists as well as the mayor and the chief. And then that will adjourn after that. Okay, so that's kind of the agenda for the evening. It'll move along at your pace. We're scheduled to get through all of that in a timely fashion, so we want to make sure that when we get to the table discussions that they move pretty expeditiously. Okay, you'll have about 30 minutes to go through all 3 questions. Let me now introduce the panel. We have Terry Newby. Raise your hand. Yeah, there's Terry. He's a longtime Roseville resident, been here since '01. He has 3 kids who currently attend Roseville Public Schools, and he's a member of the Roseville Parks and Recs Commission. Then we have 2 high school students, Katrina Fidd and Angela Stenberg, Roseville Area High. Yeah, there you go. Then we have Dawn Eubanks, who, let me see here, who gave me a very lengthy bio.
You said you were going to shorten it down.
Don is an assistant professor at Metro State in the social work program, and he teaches subjects from human behavior in the social environment to comparative racial analysis. So he's an expert.
Yeah.
He serves as the field director and manages the American Indian Community Learning Center. Next to him is Molly Slade and her husband are 6-year Roseville residents. They have 2 school-age daughters. She's a member of the Human Rights Commission, community health, social worker, a grad student, a wide-awake ally, and accomplice. So we've got a variety of folks here. Let's give a hand to the panel. And with that, we'll start with Terry.
Thank you, Marquita. I'm Terry Newby, as Marquita said, a long time, or I guess not long time, Roseville resident since 2001. For me, this whole thing started after the Philando Castile shooting. I was driving home from a meeting, and I happened to drive past the intersection where it had taken place, and it was about 15 or 20 minutes after the event had taken place. I didn't know what had happened. I thought it was a car accident. Sure, I thought it was a car accident, and only after I got home did I realize what had happened. And I was pretty upset, as I think a lot of people were, because I drive past that intersection all the time, and I began to think what would happen if I'd been driving that intersection 10 or 15 minutes earlier. So I didn't know what to do, and so I called several people, including Councilmember Etten, who I know from a variety of different events, and I also called Chief Mathwig to suggest that the city should do something, I didn't know what, but have some kind of event to talk about that issue and larger issues, and it turned into this, so I'm glad you're all here.
I'm Katrina Fidd, a senior at Roseville Area High School, and ever since all of these shootings have been made public, I've kind of self-educated myself on topics, read books, talked to people about it. And then when the Philando Castile thing happened, I was in New York City, and I was just shocked by the incident, and I just wanted to be able to do something about it and to like talk to people and get things done, because a lot of people are frustrated, and I think now is the time we actually need to take action and preventative measures. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm here.
I'm Angela Stenberg. I'm a senior at Roseville Area High School. I also heard about all the police shootings, and they felt kind of far away, but to have the Philando Castile shooting happen so close to home really brought it to heart and made me think how these issues could affect me personally in my own life so close to my own home. So yeah, I think it's really important that we're doing this.
Good evening. I'm Don Eubanks. What Marquita didn't mention is that I'm also a Roseville citizen. Been here for 14 years. And I have been doing a series of podcasts with Minnesota Public Radio called Counter Stories since 2014. And I'm one of four individuals that do this podcast. And we kind of refer to this podcast as a podcast by people of color, for people of color, and everyone else. But the idea is that we talk about current events and events that happen from perspectives we generally don't get to hear on Minnesota Public Radio, which tends to be pretty liberal and pretty white. Unfortunately, since 2014, as a member of that podcast, we spent considerable amount of time talking about similar types of issues, from the shooting of Mike Brown to the death of Freddie Gray in New York City to the shooting of Jamar Clark in Minneapolis. So when the incident with Philandro Castile happened, and we've been able to talk, I think, pretty well about the issues surrounding many of these incidences. But when I first heard of the shooting of Philandro, well, of course I was shocked. But then as details of the shooting began to come out, that shock quickly for me turned into fear. Because at first and until they released the report, it would appear that Philandro did nothing wrong. He was following the commands of the officer. They say he had a gun, but he also had a concealed carry permit, which is quite legal to have. He was complying, and yet he still ended up dead. From my perspective as a person of color, as a male of color, I was in shock. I was in fear. I mean, this was right down the street from where I live. How could it happen here? I mean, for the first time, for about a week, I drove by a Roseville cop. I just trembled inside because I didn't know what would happen. And unfortunately, that's not a way for us to have to live in a community where we should feel safe.
Hey there. Can everyone hear me? Pretty much? So I'm a grad student, so I write. My family and I have lived in Roseville for 6 years. We came for the schools and the geographically central location. I felt like I had to give up my street cred city card to move out here. I knew I was entering a rarefied environment, but I was excited by the rapidly increasing cultural diversity I saw in the school system. I want to raise my girls to embrace differences and seek out people and experiences that are not in their comfort zone. I'm an old school punk rocker, and I still carry the counterculture, question authority, DIY mentality. On July 6th, my family and I were staying in a local hotel due to a neighborhood power outage. It was about 8 p.m., and we were in our room enjoying the air conditioning, crisp sheets, and all the amenities that hotel life provides. Scrolling through Facebook, I came across the live feed of Diamond Reynolds. My heart raced as I witnessed the footage. My initial thoughts were shock, horror, and a deeply depressing sense of inevitability. I wasn't surprised it was happening, but the live footage of Philandro's last living moments lent an air of elevated reverence. I was bearing witness to his passing. I immediately felt a responsibility to him. I was impressed with Diamond's wherewithal to be filming the event. It was a crucial document. I felt like here was the incontrovertible evidence that couldn't be explained away. In retrospect, I was able to immediately mentally and emotionally distance myself from the horror and start analyzing the event and pass judgment on the people involved. That officer looks terrified. He looks incompetent. Or, oh, he was a good guy. He was employed, following the officer's orders. He was doing everything right. Maybe this is the one that will be the catalyst for things to change. I'm not proud that I was immediately trying to categorize his life and his death into worthiness. This implies that I have any right to judge worthy and unworthy deaths based on my set of limited information and biased perspective. It's a luxury that many can't afford and that we can't afford. I have a privilege of going home to my safe neighborhood, letting my children play on my safe streets, and not have to worry about unprovoked or lethal interactions with the police. But at what price do I get to have these privileges while others live in constant fear of the system that is supposed to protect and serve them? Does it have to be either or? In the 3 months since then, I've had time to filter my thoughts and feelings about that night. We have witnessed more shocking footage of violence and death. I've attended rallies and community conversations. I know there's a larger and historical dynamic at play, something that is not going to be solved tonight. But there is systematic oppression and racism in our country, in our state, and in our city. There is a school-to-prison pipeline being wrought in our schools in the name of zero tolerance. We have a love for guns and gun culture that discourages actual complicated interactions. This elevated state of conflict discourages careful discourse and community action. We live in an era of electronic media, anonymity, and gotcha politics. My day job is as a community-based social worker. I work with people diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness who are struggling to thrive in a community that is afraid of them. They face a lot of stigma, marginalization for their illnesses, something beyond their control, and a result of this societal knowledge gap, many of our police officers have very little understanding of these illnesses. I've seen some positive interactions, but I've witnessed far more institutional and systemic slights and prejudice. One client even had a physical altercation with the St. Anthony Police when he was having a psychotic episode. I don't specifically blame law enforcement. I blame centuries of biased and prejudicial policies and a society that values money, property, and status over the quality of everyone's existence. Our modern policing policies are a result of these years of laws and political influence that creates an us versus them mentality. The people who are often hired are a product of this culturally ingrained mindset. Does there really have to be a binary system of good and bad, right versus wrong, black versus white? In Minnesota, we have been a majority white state since our inception. As of 2015 census data, we are 81% of the total population. From this perspective, there has not been a pressing call for changing policy, but now the time has come. I'm on the Human Rights Commission, which is all white. We serve as an advisory capacity to the City Council, which is all white. Our state legislator is less than 5% people of color. I believe change starts at the community level. We can chip away at outdated modes of thinking and acting right in our own backyard. What can I do to affect change right here, right now? I'm hoping to be a part of the solution, and by showing up tonight, I believe you want to as well.
Thank you, panelists. I think you get a good indication of the range of perspectives that are here in the panel, and as you start your discussions, you'll have these people to further your understanding about the things that you'll get involved in as part of your discussion. So if you can't answer everything to your own satisfactions, please reserve the questions and answers that may develop for one of the 5 here, as well as the mayor and the chief. Next, we're going to have Chief Rick Mathwig, which many of you know. Chief has been in law enforcement since 1989, with nearly all of that experience in Roseville. Chief Mathwig has a bachelor's degree from Bemidji State and a master's degree from the University of St. Thomas. He also graduated from the 227th session of the FBI's National Academy. He has been the chief of police for the Roseville Police Department for just over 6 years. Let's welcome the chief.
It's yours.
It's mine. So thank you everyone for coming. I only have about 15 minutes or so I'll go through a lot of things very briefly. There were handouts in the front there. Hopefully you get a chance to look at those. Some people were being very judicious about taking one per family. There are some extra ones. So you do have extra time to go through and look at those. So the committee that planned tonight's meeting agreed that I would briefly talk about 6 subjects involving the Roseville Police Department. And everybody back there can hear me, right? Okay, I tend to yell because I'm a parent.
use of force policies, community outreach efforts, recruitment efforts for a diverse police department, de-escalation training, brief touch on traffic stops, and then body cameras here in Roseville. So the first handle I'll talk about is use of force policy that you have in front of you there. I'm only going to talk about what's in what I just X'd off there to make sure we had enough time. So at the front, our page number 1 of our use of force policy that we touch on at least once a year recognizes the respects the value and special integrity of each human life. Investing police officers with the lawful authority to use force to protect themselves and the public. A careful balancing of all human interests is required. So that's in there. Rules governing the use of force, officers are only authorized to use the force that's reasonably necessary to effect the arrest. And with that, we don't want protracted battles, which is point number 1 there. When we have a use of force situation where it lasts several minutes, the officer and the person involved almost always gets hurt. That's their fingers get broken and things like that happen. To avoid that, we do that. Our techniques are delivered at 100% to make sure we effect the arrest as soon as we can. Bullet point number 3 with that blue X there is not intention to use airway or chokeholds. If a Roseville officer places his or her arm around somebody's neck, it's deadly force. It's been that way since I started here in 1989. The second page, defensive weapons used in subsequent medical assessment. So if we use a baton, if we use a taser, if we use kicks and strikes, at a minimum, they're checked out by the paramedic. If there's more serious use of force, then it's the hospital. So everybody that we use force on, other than just maybe an arm manipulation or something like that, is seen by a paramedic and then some. The last bullet point, RPD use of force, review and action. So what we do, we've done this before I ever heard of Ferguson, Missouri. We started this change many, many years ago, where in our current reporting system, an officer uses force. Let's just say they use a baton and make a strike on someone's leg because they were physically aggressive, they were trying to attack the officer or somebody else. The officer documents that in the report. The report goes to the supervisor in an electronic system. The supervisor looks at that report and compares what's in the report against our policy manual and looks at all the video that might be available, squad video, maybe surveillance camera video from Rosedale or something like that we have access to. They look at that. And if they agree that the use of force was within policy, they authorize it. If not, they go to counseling or coaching and work together to make sure that doesn't happen, or maybe internal affairs investigation. And that has to be done before the report gets through. At the end of every quarter, we look at all of our uses of force, who's using force a lot, who's not using force. Because as you're looking at a department, you also have to look at those who aren't documenting their use of force. So if you're hiding from the system, we're going to catch it here in Roseville. We've been doing that for several years now. We have a bunch of great officers. We want to show that, and we find that's the case. The next page is use of force continuum. That, what you'll see, is what a subject does, what an arrested person does. If the person is is compliant, there's no strikes, there's no tasers, there's no anything. That's outside the use of force. So as you go through there, you can see what the actor, which is the subject that we're going to arrest, what he or she is doing, and what we're authorized to do in response to that. That's that page. The last page is there's been some discussion in the country over Graham versus Connor, which was where the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1989 set the standard that all grand juries around the country have to look at this for federal grand juries and justified use of force. That's the decision that the U.S. Supreme Court has set, and that's what all Ramsey County grand juries, Hennepin County grand juries for the U.S. federal government have to look at when they're talking about use of force. They look at the totality of the circumstances. What a reasonable officer would have done on the scene at the moment the force was used without 20/20 hindsight. So that's the bar that's been set by the U.S. Supreme Court when we talk about grand juries. That is the bar. That's the end of that. Again, I'm short on time. The next page will be community outreach and engagement efforts. We're a department of 48 cops and 11 full-time equivalent employees. We're doing a lot of community engagement, and most of it is here. I probably missed a few things. A bi-weekly newsletter, One Chief's Perspective, it comes out every 2 weeks. I already talked to somebody today in the back there that gets it. I appreciate that. That's a way, every 2 weeks I write about what we're doing, what's happening, my interpretation of the world in a law enforcement sense. You can get in that. Coffee with a Cop events, we've been doing that for several years now, and our next one is actually going to be at Rosedale at the Caribou downstairs on Friday. We do that several times a year. We started probably in 2014 or so. That's a chance to talk to us. If you want to bring problems forward, questions, we get questions from all over the country at times on things. Something happens in Shoreview, something happens in Roseville, California, we get a chance to talk about it. There is a Roseville, California. and in Roseville, Michigan, and in Roseville, Georgia. We get confused with them all the time. Family night out at Central Park. That's the first Monday of every August. So that's the bouncy house. That's the State Patrol helicopter when they can. That's the petting zoo. That's the officers there. That's the squad car tours. We do it every August for about the last 10 or 12 years. It's a great way before the Night to Unite, which is the first Tuesday of August. It's a great way to come out at Central Park, Lexington every year. So bank on it for next year. Our current customer service survey, basically we started that in the beginning of this year, and this is the card we send out. And how many times have you been involved in a traffic stop in any other city, and 2 weeks later you got a card and asked about the customer service ability of the squad, the officer, that cop that stopped you? Anybody had that happen to them other than Roseville? No. Nobody's doing it except for us. Got the idea from Chicago. Ironically enough, got it from Chicago. Written up in an IAC, and the suburbs did it too. Has anybody here gotten a card? Maybe a traffic stop, a traffic crash, victim of a crime, a complainant. I hope you filled it out, because we're doing that. 89%, our first 6-month checkup was in July of this year. 89% of them had strongly agreed that we had great customer service. Again, what other PD is sending these out in Minnesota? I haven't found one. Monthly summaries that we send out every month. We used to give it to the council. Now we send it to everybody in the world that wants to get it. That shows how many alarms we went to, how many arrests we made, the location of arrests of the people that come into Roseville, some summary of more interesting calls for service, and some of the things that officers get involved in with the training and what's happening there. You can learn about us. Lemonade stands. Some agencies do hot dog stands and things like that. St. Paul did a bunch of them this summertime. We do lemonade stands for the last probably 15 years. Where several times every crew has to go through at least once a summer and have a lemonade stand. A lot of apartment complexes, the beaches, and things like that. I talked to somebody tonight whose kids were at Lake McCarran's, and cops came by. Jen's crew, wherever Jen is, there you are. Jen's crew came by and gave out lemonade and some bouncy balls and things like that. Works out great. It's a way for us to interact with the kids in a lemonade setting. It works out wonderfully. Soccer, futsal, badminton camps. We had basically a lot with Central Park Elementary and also with the Fairview Alternative High School. We've done several of those over the years. And as Annual Citizen Police Academy, I highly encourage you to do that if you're not a Roseville resident. Most of the suburbs in Minneapolis and St. Paul do it. Ramsey County does it too. We do it ours in the late winter, early spring. It's 8 sessions, about 3 hours. You learn everything about us. Canines, use of force, budgets, meet the narcotics officer. It's a great way to learn about Roseville PD in a short period of time. Roseville U in 2015, that's the way the city of Roseville, you got to know Park and Rec and streets and things like that. We were supposed to do 3 presentations. Identity theft, fraud, the second was police canine teams, and the third one was use of force. And I mentioned it here, we only had 6 people sign up. And we couldn't do it because the equipment failed, and we had a low enrollment. What I'm asking people to do, pay attention to your police department before a critical incident happens. We would have done use of force scenarios, what Roseville does. Shoot, don't shoot scenarios, what Roseville does, what Roseville trains. We only had 6 people show up. So I'm asking you, even if you don't live in Roseville, pay attention to your department before a critical incident happens. Lunch in Schools program, that's a great way we interact with elementary and high school students. My school for the last 3 years has been the Fairview Alternative High School. It's the high school kids that are over there. It's great to talk to them. It's a different perspective. I had a conversation last year with a gentleman, Latino, that spoke Spanish. That's all he spoke, and his friend spoke English to me to try to help him take care of a traffic ticket. It took a long time to get that done. It works out wonderfully. Shop with a Cop, we've done that since 2005. That's a product with the Target stores. We've done that. We get donations, and we take kids out that are names are given us by the school. For kids that need help, families that need help, some families that we encounter with domestic abuse, and some families that need help. We help them out through donations. And what's always the case, the kids looking for gifts for their moms, their dads, their grandma, and not themselves. We found really good kids that want to give to others, and we just give them a chance to do that. Might be running out of time, so I gotta hurry up. Not in Our Town, that was a film about a school, high school student in Colorado that was killed because he was gay. We've looked at that with the high school kids along with the Human Rights Commission. St. Odelia's Church, just up in Shoreview off of Victoria, has a huge Latino Spanish ministries. Did a session, just a meet and greet with their congregation. We're going to do one here in just a couple weeks on a Sunday. Go up and got a few really fluent Spanish speakers with the department go up with me and we talk. And a lot of the discussions last year when we did it involved driving. Transportation is huge. With anybody, transportation is huge, especially those that don't speak English. Partnership with area places of worship, co-hosted a carnival alongside Grace Church at the apartment complex in Grice and Larpenteur. I think it was in July or August of this year. It worked out wonderfully. We were able to help on that. Human Rights Commission and city council members have been invited to training and ride-alongs as a way to get information out there. Next page is de-escalation training. De-escalation training is actually interwoven in a lot of what we do. Mental health awareness trainings, half-day sessions. We've had 3 or 4 of them offered just in the last 7 or 8 years. Before I ever heard of Ferguson, Missouri, before I heard of Freddie Gray, we did a lot of mental health training in half-day sessions. Communicating through culture and conflict de-escalation training, that's what we did just this last August. We have a program with us every 2 or the maximum 3 years. We're talking about mental health awareness training, cultural awareness training, and interloping them, and as a circuit, we do that training every other year. Crisis intervention team training, otherwise known as CIT training. About 13 or 14 of us are trained in, I'm not one, but 13 or 14 of us in the department are trained in that or equivalent training. We have an aggressive plan by the end of 2018 for every Roseville cop, including me, to be CIT or equivalent trained by the end of 2018. That's going to cost money. We're going to make it happen. It's important, so we're going to do that. The second bullet point with that, Roseville PD initiated a countywide program. We're on duty right now. The squads are out in the street in Ramsey County, including St. Paul. If there's an incident where there's mental health crisis going on and we need a trained CIT person there, and there isn't one working in that city like Roseville, we'll get on the air, say, hey, is anybody working that CIT train from White Bear Lake to Mounds View to St. Paul? They'll come into Roseville and help us out. We had that happen with New Brighton just a couple months ago. We didn't have a CIT trained person, so they came and helped us out. So that was spearheaded by Roseville PD. Implicit bias training, we repeat that annually. That's some online training that all the cops have to go through, including myself. Use of force training in action, which is the next bullet point. We do use of Minnesota mandates. We do 8 hours of training every year. We do 12 to 16, depending on the cycle a year, either 12 or 16 hours. And as part of that training, we have scenario-based training. The U.S. Supreme Court has said the best, the most applicable training in law enforcement is scenario-based. It's not lecture, it's not online, it's scenario-based. So we do that. 25% of our scenarios involve only dialogue as the right answer. So even if I mess that up, I have to do it again. If we do it again and don't make it again, we have to go through. We cycle cops back through that training to have to do that. Some of the scenarios involve mock traffic stop where the driver had a permit to carry. If you did anything beyond dialogue, you flunked it, you had to do it again. Another one was based off an incident in Burnsville a couple years ago where someone came into Burnsville Police Department and had a knife and was threatening himself with a knife. Burnsville did what they did. In our case, if you did anything but verbal, you flunked this scenario. So we do that routinely. We've been doing that for years now, 10 years or so. Recruitment for a diverse department. A community service officer, which are college kids that want to be in law enforcement. That's a feeder program for our department. A lot of cities do that. Back in 2015, the PD self-imposed a budget cut to make it happen for our first CSO. We took some of our own money, cut it to make it happen. We spearheaded the change in the city policy to tuition reimbursement for part-time, because up until now, part-time employees in Roseville couldn't make use of the tuition reimbursement. The PD brought that forward, and the city manager's office made it happen, or it's going to make it happen. The last 4 CSO hiring processes involved, you had to speak a second language of the 5 most spoken languages at Roseville schools. There are 66 spoken, I think there's like 66 spoken at the homes of Roseville kids. You had to speak one of those 5. If you didn't speak one of those 5, you had to have experience in organizing communities of color. So we've done that and if you didn't have one of those 2 pieces, don't apply, because you're not going to make it. So we've done that. A law enforcement mentorship program. We're a founding member with Century College, along with 5 other police agencies, to a mentoring program at Century College, which has a large law enforcement program. It's focusing towards families that's the first college kid or communities of color. And we're one of the 6 founding members with Century College to make that happen. That started this last school year. Our Police Explorer Post, which is based a lot of Roseville High School kids. That's a great way to get kids introduced to law enforcement and works with them. And like I mentioned, with the 66 languages spoken at Roseville schoolhouses, we get a diverse group of people coming through. And lunch in schools is another way to recruit cops, especially with Fairview High School where I'm at. So stay connected. If you're not following us, there's no reason you can't, because it's right here in front of you. So I would ask you to pay attention to us between critical incidents. The last two I'll talk about real quick. I think I'm okay with, Marquita hasn't hooked me up yet. I'll call this a traffic stops, how to make the situation not get worse, is what we're talking about. Roseville makes thousands of traffic stops every year, thousands. Helpful information for you not to make it worse. Pull over to the right curb as soon as you see the lights. Pull over to the right. You can pull over to the other curb legally. It's nicer, it's easier for us if you pull over to the right curb, because that's how most people do it. The officer has already determined where he wants you to stop. He doesn't want you to go down to the next light. He or she wants you to stop back here. So don't predetermine, let the officer predetermine the stop. Put the automobile in park and take your foot off the brake. The people, in my experience, the people that don't put it in park and take their foot off the brake are either drunk or they're going to flee. They're going to bail, either on foot or in the car. I've had all that happen to me. You're making a traffic stop, people that have the foot on the brake because they're going to go. Remain in your car. That may differ in other parts of the country, but remain in your car. Let the officer approach you. The officer could approach you on either side. Don't be surprised. There's two ways there's many ways to do the traffic stop. There's different approaches that mean something on different stops. So they could come to the driver's side or they could come to the passenger side. Don't be worried that they come up on the other side. Don't feel the need to find your driver's license and your proof of insurance until the officer asks you. So if I'm stopping you, if I'm the person being stopped and I stop and I pull over here and start digging on the floor, the officer doesn't know what you're digging for. You could be digging for your driver's license and your proof of insurance, or you could be hiding contraband, you could be digging a gun. Those are furtive gestures or furtive movements as recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court. Just wait for that officer to come up and give him the driver's license and proof of information. You might be trying to be helpful, but it may have an unintended look to it. The rest of the traffic stop is depending on what happens. I just want to help try to get some information about how not to make it worse right away. The last piece that people want to be talking about is body-worn camera policy, or we're calling it portable recording system. That's what the state statute has defined it as, portable recording system. For the last a little over 2 years, we've been testing out two companies. One ultimately made by Taser, the other one by Panasonic. And we found pros and cons to both of them. And we expect to implement those department-wide in early 2017, assuming the city council authorizes it in the budget, because it's not cheap. So we expect to do it in 2017. On the October 24th is the community meeting at the Roseville City Council meeting to talk about input on our body-worn cameras or our portable recording system. That survey is already on our website as of today. You can look at the documents, our draft policy, you can look at the state statute, you can look at the model policy by the League of Minnesota Cities, and you can take a survey for your input. So we'll have that up to probably mid-November. So that's the plan so far. Thank you for paying attention, thank you for coming, and thank you for taking an active measure in making Roseville and every place else a better place. Thank you.
That was really good. That was very informative. Okay, now to the meat of the program, I should say, that would involve you. Don't forget, you have to identify someone as the scribe and someone who will make the report. wants to report out from their table? Don't be shy. There has to be somebody who wants to report out what they've been talking about.
Thank you. This was a real privilege. We talked a little bit in the first question. Some of us had just shock about the Philando Castile shooting, how it happened in our backyard. For some of us, it happened while we had no power or internet and didn't know about it until the next morning. Looking around and seeing other people's reactions was informative. And there was a lot of sadness, anger, helplessness, and confusion. And I don't know that that's really cleared up. We talked about the role of race in policing, the ability to challenge a police officer if you're white is something, it's a piece of the privilege that I've always sort of assumed it was okay to ask questions and things, and I don't think everyone has that opportunity. We talked a lot about what would it be like in a completely separate universe if we had never armed our law enforcement and never armed our citizenry. We didn't think that was the most practical thing. And then but it is an interesting thought. We did also talk about that we need a people-first mentality with our law enforcement. We appreciate the fact that our Minnesota law enforcement needs a college degree. You need to, it's not just a vocational training, it's a college degree that's required in Minnesota. And I think is that it?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I'm good with that. He told me to go. So.
You're messing up my lineup.
Yeah, I'm messing up. All right. I don't want to mess up the lineup.
Come after you.
Oh my. Yes, the power was out at my house for about 43 hours, so I didn't know about this either. I guess what we could say is it was just overwhelming sadness. How could it happen in our backyard? We were angry. Some folks didn't sleep for weeks. There was fear. My own talk to my son got accelerated. He's 14 years old. We had to have the talk early. Sometimes there's too much social media. There's just too much. This was close to home. I guess that's what we had talked about at the table. And I think tonight it's important to have this kind of dialogue. We also talked about the role of race, a big role in statistics that show disparities in all our lives, racing in not only just law enforcement, but education and employment. We talked about race matters, why a white man will get 3 months for raping someone. An African American who commits a similar crime will get locked up for the rest of their lives. I have a family member in Florida that was jogging, and he was put away because he was mistaken for someone else. And he has not seen the light of day since the 1980s. Systemic racism, and not just in policing. And we talked about this training issue in some departments, that they're trained to shoot first and then ask questions later, that there didn't seem to be a uniform standard. So we discussed that. And we also talked about who would be hurt at the risk without law enforcement. We need law enforcement, but we need to be enforced in a way that respects all people. That there needs to be a sense of equity in enforcement. And I couldn't help but think back to John Hinckley, my wife was at the emergency room when they brought President Reagan in, and he's out of prison. I mean, would that be true for a person of color or someone else? So we talked a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Some of the things that were going on at our table with respect to the first question had to do with wondering about how police officers can come from other cities and come into Roseville and have the force within the city. So we were having that dialogue about how police officers within a very large area may be contracted, and please do tell me if I'm saying something incorrect here, but they can be contracted, and so many Roseville police officers will have, will be able to potentially, should it be required, use force in other local cities. Minneapolis was even brought up, but then the reverse would be true. So New Brighton, the biggest concern, and as part of the reaction to the Philando Castile shooting, would be with all of the fantastic training that was being discussed, are those other areas coming into Roseville trained as well? And the answer was likely not, because it's not required. And in Roseville, we could be grateful and hope that that we get pulled over by Roseville police. So there was a lot of serious sadness with the shooting of Philando Castile. Hostilities seemed high in some ways, reasonably so, and it was like truly like being punched in the gut for 4 or 5 days, where all I wanted to do was throw up. That's a personal reaction. It was absolutely overwhelming, and wondering, as a biracial family that I have, I became very afraid for my entire family, refusing to allow my daughter to ride her bike during the day, just any number of things. I became very terrified. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So our table had mixed reactions to the shooting. One that I think has been touched on before was that when Mr. Castile was killed, the person had thought just the day before, oh, well, that couldn't happen in Minnesota. And then Mr. Castile was killed, and it took somebody killed in this person's own backyard to pay attention to what is the problem with black people, black men particularly, dying at the hands in traffic stops and other occasions that it doesn't look right. There are also questions about, well, do we really know what happened? And, you know, there's just a lot of confusion, and I'm going to jump to a different place in the conversation, but we were talking about how Facebook, if you look at Facebook like I do, you look at one thing and Facebook says, oh, they're interested in that point of view. So they keep giving you the point of view that you are interested in, and they don't necessarily open that up for you. So you can begin to live in a social media bubble if you're not aware of it. And then we talked about how we're sympathetic to both sides, in the sense that, well, if you're like me and you have a black son-in-law, or you have biracial nephews, you worry about them, and the fear escalates. But then our person said she also couldn't imagine being a police officer, and then you have an escalating fear going out into the community every day. And we have a media person at our table, and we were saying that the media escalates the issues as well, so that we may not get all the information that we would like. At our table, we had no people of color, and we were talking about our white privilege, and that perhaps if we had an African American or another person of color at our table, we might have heard different perspectives. I think we had a lot of sympathy for communities of color as we understand them, but we would like to know more. We'd like more diversity. We'd like to have more opportunities to communicate and learn from and work with communities of color, not be passive but be active. And then we didn't like the last question. Who would be hurt or at risk without law enforcement? That's not the issue. We all want law enforcement. Nobody wants to live in an environment where we're hiring our own police or anything like that. But what we want is to have police be answerable. We do have, it seems like, a very good police system in Roseville. So as the person just said, how do we make this applicable across Minnesota? Thanks.
Hi. So at my table, everyone pretty much had the same feeling. I felt horrible. You know, I was sick to my stomach, this whole thing. But my reaction was actually different. The first time I watched the video, I didn't feel anything, because people of color are very desensitized to the situation because it happens so often. And a lot of people, not just at my table, but I was listening to other conversations, you know, like, oh, we wouldn't have this without Facebook, we wouldn't have to watch that. I feel horrible about what happened to Philando, but it's good that people saw that, because they need to see that. They need to see that this is reality and this happens all the time, not on social media, just in our life. I lived in Roseville for a very long time. I live in St. Paul now, but my family still lives in Roseville, and I have brothers who are 16. They're young, they're dumb, you know, they're ignorant, just whatever, just doing dumb stuff. And, you know, I know that when they come to my house, I have to tell them to take certain back routes, because I know where the cops are and where they're not, and when they're gonna do something, just because, you know, for instance, another problem we have is there's a lot of us. I started a group called AR-14 for Justice, and we're youth-led, and we do a lot of things that are protesting for Philando, to end police brutality, to end systematic oppression, all that stuff. But we're targeted by police for trying to fight against the police. You know, I've had people illegally detained at my house. I've been arrested for no reason. I've had women of color being slammed onto the ground in front of me, and just, there's a lot of problems that are going on, not just, you know, oh, who should we have for policing us? We need, you know, everyone says we need to police the police. And one of the things we talked about is, you know, how can we change this? There's not one avenue, not one way, not one easy solution, or else we obviously would have done that already. The problem is we don't need to just change all the laws. We need the police to be held accountable to the laws. People say, oh, there's a lot of gray here. I see it as black and white. You murdered him, you know, you need to go to jail. It's just that simple. You need to stand trial. You need if I killed someone of color, white, anything, I already know I'd be waiting in prison, just waiting on my trial. So everyone needs to stand accountable for that. And we also need to stop, you know, just terrorizing people of color because they're not white. You know, another thing is they were like, oh, should we have white people move into black communities? Well, I said to him, you know, we need to be able to have black people move into white communities without fearing for their life. That's really, you know, we need to stop just looking at, let's go over there. Well, you know, come into my community, come help, come learn, come see what we're doing. You guys, you know, not being racist is passive. You need to be able to, you know, that's walking the fine line of, oh, well, I'm just not doing anything. You need to like go the extra step and see that like, okay, I can fix something, I can help, I can do this. You just need to go talk to a young black person, go see what they need. Because there's like a lot of other things that are going on, not just one thing of why all this is happening. This escalates from people of color being at a very young age. So yeah, there's like a lot of issues here, and everyone just needs to kind of know that it's not it doesn't just start with police, but police need to be held just as accountable as anybody else in this room. Thanks.
What's up, everybody? I had the opportunity to sit at we had mixed races at our table. Everybody was really nice. But what I got from our discussion was that even though we all had different perspectives and different standpoints, we all were equally affected. It seemed everyone was emotional, whether it be angry, sad, worried, about their own family members, people that they work with, themselves. I heard that, someone, when they heard that it happened, they had already known for whatever reason, hey, you don't drive down Larpenteur. Maybe it's because they get pulled over there. I've gotten pulled over there. But, for them, it was like a click, like, oh, I knew that was the reason. It was just like a confirmation of that fear that was already there. And it took us a lot of time just to kind of get through the first question. And so we didn't even really touch on much of the other ones. And I think that there is a lot of discussion that needs to happen. And I kind of personally was looking through the rest of the questions. What role do you think race plays in policing? There's propaganda that goes on, that there's this image that's created, and media. I heard someone earlier say that media contributes to that. I think that is very true. Media is going to play and show you what is going to get you the ratings, which is why I try not to pay too much attention to media. And then also, who would be at hurt or at risk without law enforcement? Obviously there would be chaos without any type of order, but I don't know how to answer that question. I think that that's the reason why we're here, to try to figure out what we can do to start making some changes. But this is probably a good first step. Conversation just come together. But overall, I think we all kind of felt the same way, which is good, because I would hate to hear someone feel some other type of way. I think it wouldn't have gone over as smoothly as it did. So that's good for that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Alrighty, bear with me, I'm a little nervous. Our table talked a lot about what was your reaction to the Flannel Castile and other recent events, and we were saying how it was so tragic because it hit so close to home, and for me it was just right down the street from my house, and I just remember that night just getting like text messages, phone calls, like, oh, did you see what was going on, like what happened? And I remember just going outside and I see cops just up and down the street, and then like it's within walking distance, and the next night I walked down and there are flowers everywhere, chalk everywhere, signs, cards, and I myself did a little bit of decorating. We also talked about what role do you think race plays in policing, and we said that race adds fear and tension, which makes the situation more dangerous. And I also, I guess it's important that, a question that I haven't heard from a lot of people, because there is a Black Lives Matter, but what I haven't heard was, why don't Black Lives Matter? And I think that that's a very important question to have. But I don't think that a lot of people have the answers to that, but I think that's a very important question. And of course, who would be hurt without law enforcement? Everyone. I think law enforcement is very important, and I respect all of you policemen out there. But I do think that there needs to be a better training, if that's the right word to use. I don't know. But I think they need to focus on training and not be so quick to jump to the worst, like, bad conclusions. I guess, thank you.
All right, so we're taking a tag team approach. We came up together. I'll just say, too, we thought that the third question was a little a non-starter, a non-conversation starter, because obviously there's a need for law enforcement. People need to call for help and need to rely on somebody to come and help them. The conversation started with our reaction to the shooting of Mr. Castile and other recent events. And again, like everybody else said, confusion, sadness, grief, turning to anger, questions, lots and lots of questions about what has taken place in history to lead us to this place now, in terms of social media, making it so much more visible than it had ever been to a lot of us before. And I don't think we're going to add anything particularly new here, except for in relation to the question about the role race plays in policing, specifically here in Roseville. And so my neighbor Jess is going to talk about that.
Hi, everyone. So I am a mother of a young black man in Roseville. He's a senior at Roseville High School. And he called me the night Philando Castile was shot. I was in Seattle, and he was sobbing. He was sobbing, begging me not to watch the video, and horrified, and saying things like, "It took place within walking distance of where I took my ACT test. You watch him die, Mom. He dies in the car. Don't watch it." And I got off the phone and thought I should fly home. I should be with him. I should be with my son. Some of his students, his classmates, are in this classroom. I stayed in Seattle, came home. We went to the memorial. I went to Philando's funeral with my mother. And he's been pulled over 4 times by the Roseville Police in our neighborhood on foot. At the age of 13, at the age of 14, and at the age of 16. On foot, twice in the same night, within 10 minutes apart. When he said he was having a snowball fight with some of his friends, they told him to disperse. They asked him where he lived. He told them where he lived. And he was walking to his home, and he was pulled over yet again. So I spoke to the officer that pulled him over and just kept asking, "Why did you stop my son? Why did you stop my son?" She could not give me a straight answer. And I know why she stopped my son. She stopped my son because he's black. So why can't we just all address this very clear, crystalline issue in our communities? He wasn't doing anything wrong. Philando Castile, from all that we can see, wasn't doing anything wrong. And I, as a mother, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to send him out. He doesn't drive. We don't let him drive. I'm terrified to let him drive. I'm stunting his growth because I'm afraid to let him get behind the wheel of a car. And, you know, I'm a white person. I've lived with privilege my entire life. And I'm just trying to grapple with what it's going to be like for him. And I must say that I'm heartened to see this community of people out here having an honest conversation. I'm heartened to see the officers in the crowd. I could say a lot about the governing rules of the use of force. I've circled a lot of knots on this statement. An officer is not required to attempt to use types and degrees of force which reasonably appear to be inadequate. An officer is not required to become involved in a protracted struggle. You know, I'm talking about a kid who's a little kid who's walking in his neighborhood. We're not talking about anyone even driving a car. So it just raises a lot of questions in my mind about how safe the black people in our community are and how we're going to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Our table had kind of a unique, I don't know, it's not unique, there are many officers here, and thank you, Chief, for bringing so many of your officers. But we had people who were not officers, and we had an officer there, and it was, we end up coming to a realization that there are different perspectives that we share. An officer describing, here's the training, here's the process that evening, whereas someone else is saying, why didn't someone help him right away? And that the officer said, you know what, it's really helpful to hear that. There's a different human side that you get used to your training, you do your thing, you secure the scene. So he's following his training, or she's following their training, and then someone else is saying, yeah, but there's a human being right there dying. And that these dialogues are where we start having that conversation, and what are the ways that we make that better for everyone involved. So it was very, very interesting to watch the officer reactions and what I see as a city council member and hear and the discussions we have around that at a city level, but then hear the everyday people saying, hey, we, as she said, watched Philando die, and it's a horrible thing. And I think we're all touched negatively by that. I think there's a beautiful thing here too, and that there are about 200 people in the room. One of the things that was great is that this isn't like Wobegon anymore. We're not all white Norwegian Lutherans. And even those of us who look like that have close friends, have family who are not. And I think that's one of those things that grows over time. My conversation with my friend Terry had me crying. And I think a lot of you have cried too. And that we cry together, I think, is one of the first steps. And we look to have more dialogues. And I know that we're committed in Roseville to what are those next steps? What's on those yellow note cards? And I hope that this is a step for that. So.
Up here quietly without disturbing other speakers. Okay, I'm going to try to sum up what we talked about in our group over here. Yes, it's the same things everybody else said. Sickened, angry, sobbing. Somebody wanted to move back to their own state they were born in because they couldn't stand the idea of living in a state where that happened. Well, we all know it's happening every place. Okay. And several of us are mothers also of children of color, adults of color, me, and concerned about our kids. That was the first thing. And I'm only here because my kids don't know I was coming. Because every time I wanted to go down by the governor's mansion or something, my kids say, you stay home, Mom, with your oxygen, you just stay home. So anyway, we had a very good conversation about race, about how in Minnesota, it's, you all had the same conversations. It's not overt. Somebody said in the South it's Jim Crow, and up here it's James Crow, because we're much more discreet. We had the redlining, but we didn't say anything about it. We tore up Rondo. We did, well, that's where there's a freeway should go. Anyway, that's just me. There was one thing that was really delightful. The young lady that's from the high school was talking about, okay, there are many different backgrounds of students, but they're all eating at the different tables in the cafeteria. And so they've started a group trying to bring people together of different races talking. And there was a suggestion made that group be expanded to bring in their parents and grandparents, because this isn't something new. It's not something that's just happening now. It's not just happening with young people. Okay, maybe my kids are right. I should have stayed home. Anyway, we talked. We didn't like the last question either, but we agreed that we need policing, but we don't like the term law enforcement. We think that a number of laws should be looked at, and maybe a number of these stops for lights burned out, a little bit over the speed limit. Do we need to be stopping people for that? There was a little bit of a discussion about a number of places where there's data of what the percentages of stops that are people of color, and we're going to get Roseville's stats. I guess we don't really know those, but that's the problem. We haven't been paying enough attention. Those of us who were born with skin that looks more Norwegian, even if thought we've been aware, we haven't been as aware of the sharp increase. What am I trying to say? The percentage of people of color who are stopped, who are arrested, who are in places of incarceration, who are having their society disrupted because all the males are being pulled out. to these places for these. We need to pay more attention. We need to know. And it's not just people that are African American and Latin. How many of us know much about Native Americans? I mean, really, I've lived here most of my life. And we liked what we heard from the chief. We'd like to have more transparency in how things are being enforced, and we'd like the idea of de-escalation. And I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you. One more, thank you.
Hi. At our table, we also talked about our reaction. It's the same as everybody else's in this room. We were shocked. There was anger, there was confusion. And for myself, I kind of asked, another one's happened, what are we going to do about it? As a black male, it's scary. I walk out of my door and I don't know if I'll make it home. It's not just Roseville. I could go to St. Paul. I could go to Maplewood. I could go anywhere in this state, and I don't know if I'm going to make it home. I don't know if my sons are going to make it back from work. I don't know if my grandchildren are going to make it home from school. It's a fear that is put into our hearts, and every person who is not of color in here doesn't have to feel that. You may be stopped, but you don't know if you reach for your license, if you look for your insurance. It's going to be mistaken. I saw the list that we have. That's something that we are taught as young children, what we have to do when the police stop you. I've lived in many different states, and it's the same thing. I'm not allowed to look into a policeman's eyes because I may be thought of as aggressive. I'm just a man. All I want to do is get home and see my family. We spent a lot of time on this first question, but the second question, what role do you think race plays in policing? It plays the same role as every other thing in my life. When I go into a store, I'm watched. When I walk down the street, I'm watched. If people want to talk to me, not at me. I heard so many people say, if you only do what they tell you, it'll be all right. It's not. I'm not an angry person. I've only been here 8 years. I love this city. But I fear for people of color. And I don't need that. I want to be able to walk down the street and go to a park and not have that fear. I don't want us to have this them against us. We're all here for the same purpose, I hope. And I hope that this is not the end of this discussion, that we go into deeper parts of this. It's not just the police. It's you, it's me, it's everybody in this room. We have to change our attitude. And on the third question, we also didn't agree with this question. We know we need the police. We know we need each other. You know, when I was a kid, and I'll end with this, when I was a kid, we were taught when a police officer comes out, you run to that police officer if you need help. I can't tell my kids that now. I can't tell my grandkids that because I'm in fear of what will happen to them. I don't want that kind of life for my kids, my grandkids. I mean, I'm in a biracial relationship. I've been married to my wife for over 40 years, and we worry about our community. And I think our community can be better than this. Thank you.
Well, give yourselves a hand clap. You guys did great. And if there are any questions that any of you have that you want to direct to one of the panelists, now is the time to do that. The question was directed to the high school students, and the question was, what were you and your peers saying about the Philando Castile shooting?
Initially, right away, everybody on Twitter and people on Instagram were posting things right away. Everybody was reposting the video and just everybody was really shocked at first. That was like the first 3 hours maybe. And then the days following, some people got angry, some people got rude, and there were like some arguments going on over like Black Lives Matter, like all lives matter, just like different nitpicky things going on. And that was all during the summer. People were talking about it, but since school started, no one has talked about it really at school, and that's something I kind of want addressed. Admin has not said a word about it, and I just want it to be discussed at school because it's our students that are affected.
Yeah, I agree. I think education is such an important part in educating people about race because that's where kids are raised, and I think they can bring that to the community around them. And I think it does definitely need to be discussed more in schools. And I know my initial reaction was I just thought about all the people I know, like this could have been them and this could have been them.
Do you think it should be discussed as part of the curriculum, or do you think it should be something separate? Some after-school thing or before-school thing or club thing or...
Well, I think in direct relation to Philando Castile, there should be at least some kind of like school gathering, like where we can just talk about that incident and how it affected us as a community. But as far as like systematic, it does need to be a curriculum because it's affecting us. We're living in it, and people aren't acknowledging it. And because it's not brought up, a lot of people are ignorant to the idea, and they're not trying to be. It's just no one's telling them that it's a thing. And if it's implemented through school, I think a lot of change will happen.
I'm sorry, on that note, I just needed to comment. I teach at Metropolitan State University. They do have a law enforcement program there, I think Rick mentioned. But one of the requirements Metro State started this year is referred to as RIGR, R-I-G-R. And what that stands for is Racial Issues Graduation Requirement. Every student who completes a degree at Metro State University now has to take a class, excuse me, that teaches them about race and more importantly about the social construct of race and the impact of discrimination. So every student that goes to Metro now has to have that requirement in order to get their degree.
Did you hear the question as far as how training and how it's verified that it's working and things like that? There's a lot of evaluators in the room that have had experience with us that can tell us if it's working or not. We hope that it is. We're a tough bar ourselves where with the training, if it doesn't meet our own needs, is thrown away, it's moved, it's maneuvered, it's changed. The court systems tell us a lot. The prosecuting attorneys tell us a lot. The commissions in town tell us a lot. But really when it comes down to accountability, it really comes from the courts. And I don't want people to forget the prosecuting attorneys and the court system is a litmus test for what we're doing. And if we're not doing it right and we're doing it disappropriately or just disparately, that cases are thrown out. And one thing that we have a great relationship with both the county attorney's office, which does prosecution for felonies, and the city attorney's office does for gross misdemeanors and misdemeanors, is they tell us this is why your case failed. This is why you arrested this person for assault on a police officer. Here's the elements that were missing. And when we have a great relationship that they do that. So that's another way to evaluate our training is actually the customer on the other side, which is actually the city and the county attorney. Your question had to do with Minnesota Post Board and what maybe union contracts or union environments can play in addressing poor behavior. Is that close enough? So every state, I believe, in the country has their version of police officer standards and training. So they hold our license, so just like a license to practice law or dentistry in Minnesota. There's a license. They have that. So they really oversee the original education in law enforcement, the 4-year and 2-year degrees. So you have to meet the certain requirements to graduate. After that, they accept information. They don't, as by state statute, they're not authorized to investigate internal affairs complaints. That has to be done by the agency, or if they give it to somebody else. So the post board can't do that. Union environments don't cause issues, as far as I'm concerned. What union environments do is make sure rights are safeguarded. We all want to be treated fairly. We all want to have a say in what's disciplined. We want to have a chance to be investigated, our internal affairs done professionally. That's really what they have to do with. People get paid. It really, for law enforcement, it doesn't get in the way of an internal affairs investigation. It just helps to make sure it's an orderly type of investigation. Right, so I think originally your question involved de-escalation training to brand new cops. The original training of a police officer in Roseville, which is pretty approximate to most of the suburbs, even inner cities, both big cities, is about a 4-month training program called Field Training Officer Program. So every decision, every left turn they make, every sentence that they write, every statement that's made is being graded by a senior officer who does a good job. Otherwise, they would never be an FTO. So they already have that as their grader right away. And with our use of force policy that I talked about is applicable as soon as the cop steps on the street the first day. So being the value of life at the top of our manual is there for new officers. They have to be accountable to that. They know they're accountable, and they have daily trainings, daily briefings, daily discussions, daily conversations with the FTO to make sure they're doing the right job at the right time for the right reason. So we have that. And the training that was mentioned in there is reoccurring for staff. So you might have an officer that over a 6-year period has had de-escalation training 3 or 4 times in that short period of time. So if you can hear it down there, the metrics kept racial statistics on stops, arrests, and things like that. Minnesota doesn't keep that. Minnesota has that, but doesn't produce that. So every agency would be on its own. So what all of Ramsey County just started September the 30th is every traffic stop, there's a special race category that's on there now. Because with our records management system and with Roseville and then shared by some other agencies, and what the FBI commands and we have to give them, and what's in our system didn't quite mesh as it should have. We just literally found out about a month ago with some discussions and we've had in the old department as to what's there. So now to make it match, all of Ramsey County will be tracking every traffic stop with information. At the end of it, it'll be race and sex and searched or not, that whole thing. So that's all of Ramsey County's doing that. Autism, as we talked about, autism is not mental illness, but our mental illness contains a component dealing with people with autism. It's not a mental illness, but as far as the training that goes involved, it's part of it, especially the CIT training I talked about, it's part of that. Even though it's not a mental illness, it's treated it's trained on within those classes. Right, so the question was is training involving autism and with the community and how having some forms of autism might be, putting words in your mouth now, might be viewed as being obstinate or not obeying commands. I'll just direct you to a policy that says, unless they're being physical, we're not going to be hands-on. That's Roseville.
I've heard a variety of things tonight. You've been fantastic. I've heard everything from the whole racial issue and concerns around that to questions around police procedure and police practice and how what we used to call as praxis, how policy and practice meet. And then, God bless you. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.